All right, I'll get this started. I'm Leo. I'm the project assistant here for Project Echo at the Institute for Disability Research, Policy and Practice. Welcome to today's Time to Act Substance Use Echo. If you could please enter your name and contact information in the chat as you're entering, it'd be appreciated just as it helps us get that networking started. We are recording for today's session for quality and educational improvement purposes. So by participating in this session, you are consenting to being recorded. So if you do not wish to be recorded, you may disconnect from the session. We do really hope that you'll stay because your participation and insights are really what make these sessions meaningful, and we just hope you'll stay and be part of this conversation. Right. And Echo is a participatory and interactive community. Questions are always welcome to be dropped in the chat, and we can get them answered either during the didactic or after the didactic. Case narratives and discussions are also just a really great way to get support on a difficult case. Just apply strategies from these Echo sessions to real-world problems. So if you haven't yet presented a case narrative, please consider doing so just by messaging Project Scope at usu.edu. And let's also remember to please protect individual privacy. So that's just when sharing examples, avoiding real first, middle, or last names. And if you are unsure about it, you may ask a hub member who should all have asterisks by their name. We're always happy to help, and this just keeps our space safe and respectful for everyone to be participating in. And there are some key components to today's Echo session. I am kind of facilitating this session today alone, so today might look a little different. We'll only have our didactic speaker for today, who is actually Marnie Maxwell from DCFS in Utah. And just again, another component of an Echo session is just that networking that can happen over this virtual Zoom world. It can happen in the chat or sometimes in those breakout rooms when we have case presentations. And also remember to rename your profile if you could. We always like it when you name your profile to your name, where you're at, your organization, and your job title. And the raising hand feature is just a really helpful when you don't want to interrupt the presenter or if you don't want to interrupt somebody that's speaking. It's in that reactions tab at the bottom of your screen. And just to go over some quick Echo session etiquette, let's just remember to respect the presenter by using the chat or raising hands when they're speaking. Let's also remember to keep our questions brief and on topic. We'd also love for if you introduce yourself and your organization before asking a question, and this just helps us stay connected and get to know each other. And last, we do encourage you to turn your camera on as it helps us to connect over this virtual Echo session. And how to get credit for attendance. Sorry, let me go back. By filling out a survey that I'll actually be dropping in the chat today, you can earn a certificate for attendance. Participants really like to share these certificates with their employers or supervisors as just documentation of ongoing professional learning. We also like to go over your feedback when we go over those surveys as well, because every response just helps us improve future Echo sessions and just create a really great learning experience for you guys. And Canvas is where we store additional resources where you can view past Echo sessions and access case recommendations as well. So if you'd like an invite to our Canvas page, you may email projectscope@usu.edu and we can send you an invite to that. Also, just another quick plug for case studies. There's a really great way to receive applicable and valuable feedback on maybe a difficult, challenging case that you may have been working on. So, and they also don't need to match the didactic or the topic of the presentation of that Echo session. So if you're interested in just presenting any challenging situation that you may be going through, you can always email projectscope@usu.edu and we can help you get set up with that. Also, remember to follow USU IDRPP Project Echo on social media. We have a Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. You can scan those QR codes and you can follow those pages if you'd like. So yeah, thank you guys for participating, and now I'll give the time over to Marnie.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I've been with the Division of Child and Family Services since 2002. I've done child protective services as well as I'm currently over the intake program. Intake is the program where all of the referrals of child abuse and neglect are made. And so I have about 40 staff that take all of those referrals 24/7, 365 days a year. And so we're gonna talk a little bit about that, about making a report. And we'll also, sorry, let me make sure. There we go. We'll also talk about just a little bit about DCFS and how the system works. I'm just kind of giving you a little bit of an overview. We will have time at the end for questions. If you have a real specific question about something I'm discussing at the time, I think you can raise your hand or put a question in the chat, and Leo's going to help monitor that. But we'll go ahead and get started. So here at DCFS, we want to help create safe children and strengthen families, and we need a lot of help from the community partners to do that because we don't have a lot of services within our agency. Most services and resources that we help provide to families are actually out in the community, and so it really, it takes a village to do this. So we appreciate all of you that also help work with children and families and make that happen. At DCFS, we have the state divided into 5 different regions. So depending on where the family lives, the case would generally get assigned to that particular area or region. But when it comes to the intake program where you make reports of abuse and neglect, it's a statewide program. And so when you call intake, you get the same group of people, making those decisions and opening those cases or deciding whether we open a case or not. Today, we're going to talk about when to report, about making the call or making the report, and also what to expect after a report is made. So I'm assuming everyone on this call knows this, but it's good to just go over the fact that in the state of Utah, we have a mandatory reporting law. And what that says is that anyone, really any adult in the state of Utah who has a reason to believe child abuse or neglect has occurred is mandated to report that either to law enforcement or to DCFS. Now, the reason you can report to either agency is because then each agency is required to cross-report to each other. So if a report is made to law enforcement, they are required by law to notify DCFS if it's a report involving potential child abuse or neglect. And if you notify DCFS, we're required to send our report over to law enforcement. And we do that whether or not we end up opening a CPS, Child Protective Services case or not. We still create a report. We'll talk a little bit more about that. But either way, a report is created and sent to law enforcement. And then, so then both agencies are notified of the concern, and some cases DCFS, is involved with and law enforcement doesn't get involved with. Some cases law enforcement gets involved and DCFS doesn't. And then some cases we will be working together on. So, there's just sometimes where it might be more criminal in nature. And if that's the case, more criminal than a child welfare issue, if that makes sense. And so in those cases, it would just be law enforcement. And then in some, especially neglect type situations, sometimes it's just DCFS that would be involved. So in the state of Utah, DCFS gets involved if there's abuse, neglect, or dependency. And we're going to talk about what those are. If a family is maybe living in poverty, maybe they're homeless or have cultural differences, that's not something that we would potentially be involved with. But we'll go into some more detail about that right now when we talk about what it is that DCFS does get involved with, or what the state of Utah considers to be abuse or neglect. I have a list here of the different abuse allegations that we investigate, as well as a list of neglect allegations that we investigate. And what I like to do, and this is just meant to help you understand, I guess, when to make a report to DCFS. I just want to kind of go over these really briefly. So hanging in there, there's quite a few of them, but just to kind of give you an idea of what we're looking for when it comes to these allegations. So Starting with the abuse side, child endangerment is defined as threatened harm to a child. That's really broad and could be lots of different things, but usually DCFS is getting involved for child endangerment when a parent or caregiver has a substance abuse issue, a substance use issue that might be causing harm or threatened harm to a child. So we don't get involved if there's a concern that a parent or an adult might be using an illegal substance. That might be something that you would report to law enforcement, maybe not to DCFS. But if they're caregivers of children and there's a concern that their substance use might be creating an unsafe situation for their child or children, then it would be a report to DCFS. So, for example, something that we would investigate as child endangerment would be an adult driving with the child in the vehicle, driving under the influence with the child in the vehicle. That would be considered child endangerment. If a parent's using an illegal substance in the home and if they're unable to care for their younger children, that could also be child endangerment. So again, if you're concerned about substance use by a parent or caregiver, I think when you're reporting it, just keep in mind that we kind of need to know not just that they're using an illegal substance, but how that is negatively impacting the children around them. Domestic violence related child abuse is complicated. The best way because DCFS does not investigate all of these cases. Law enforcement investigates most of them. We only get involved in certain situations. I don't think we have time today to go into all of that. I would just say, if you're aware that a child saw or heard a violent interaction between cohabitants, you should report that. If DCFS is not going to be involved, law enforcement typically is. So just keep that in mind, that is a form of abuse that needs to be reported. Emotional abuse is when there's emotional harm to a child. That's what we're looking for when you're concerned about emotional abuse is, did the caregiver or the parent do or say something that caused emotional harm to the child? We get reports, the child's really upset because the parent took away their phone as a form of punishment. Well, that's not emotional abuse. But I think if the parent is doing or saying things that's really, like, for example, I guess if the parents, calling the child names, things like that, maybe really mad, yelling at them in the morning, it really depends on the child. All children are different, and you might have a child that goes about their day, doesn't really care what the parent said to them that morning, or you could have some children who are more sensitive and maybe they're self-harming or they're suicidal because of the things that the parent is doing or saying. And if so, that would be the emotional harm. Okay, so we're looking for emotional harm when we're deciding whether or not to open a case for this. So just be aware of that. Material harmful to a child is when an adult provides pornographic material to a child or allows access to it. Physical abuse is non-accidental harm or threatened harm to a child. I often get questions about physical discipline, and in the state of Utah, physical discipline is allowed as long as there's no harm caused. And so, parent has a right to spank their child, but if they're leaving welts or bruises or marks or other injuries to the child, then a case would be open for physical abuse. Sex abuse. So, sorry, we might be going into too much detail. I don't know if we have time for all of this, but there's different ages of consent. Basically, any child 13 and under cannot consent to any sexual activity, and so that needs to be reported. 14 and 15-year-olds can only consent to some things, and so you might want to consider reporting a 14 or 15-year-old if you're aware that they're having sexual interactions. 16 and 17-year-olds can consent to all sexual acts unless there's an age difference of 7 years or more, or someone's in a position of trust. You guys can have access to my just because there's a lot and it's complicated, sometimes you guys are welcome to have access to my email address and you can reach out to me if you have questions about some of these things that we don't have time to go into a lot of detail on. So just be aware of that. Um, Fetal exposure. So if a pregnant woman is using illegal substance during pregnancy, and then at the time of birth, if the child is showing any adverse effects, such as withdrawal symptoms or other adverse effects that we believe are related to the substance use during pregnancy, that would be considered fetal exposure. Now, we cannot accept a case prior to the birth of the child. We can only investigate concerns about minor children, and the way that's defined in our state is from birth until age 18. So if you have a concern about fetal exposure during pregnancy, you're still welcome to make a report to us. We wouldn't be able to open a case at that time, but we do have am I still here? Sorry, my screen just went blank.
No,
Can
you're
you?
okay. You're still there. Yeah, no, I can
Okay.
hear you.
That was weird. All right. Sorry, back to fetal exposure. So we can't get involved until we cannot get involved until the child's been born. But if you make a report prior to the birth of the child, we can make a referral to another agency who can reach out to the mother and offer some resources. So just be aware of that we'll still document it in our system and we'll make the referral, and that's a voluntary thing, so the other agency will have a case manager reach out to the mom, offer her some different resources to try and assist with those issues. The mom can accept that or not, but either way, when the child's born, typically the medical professionals will call us if there's any concerns, any adverse effects or withdrawal symptoms from substance use during pregnancy. And that's only illegal substance use. Obviously, sometimes things are prescribed to a mother that could cause some withdrawal symptoms or other effects. And so we're only talking about illegal substance use during pregnancy there. On the neglect side, medical neglect is when the parent's not providing proper medical care or complying with the recommendations of a medical professional. Physical neglect is when the child's basic needs aren't being met. Failure to thrive is, when the child fails to gain adequate weight. And that can be fatal to children. It's usually involving children. You guys are probably aware, but younger children or maybe even children with disabilities typically. But it's good to report that so that we can try and get the child in to be seen by a doctor. Environmental neglect is when the environment poses an unreasonable risk to the physical health or safety of the child. And that can be based obviously on the child's age or developmental level. With environmental neglect, we get a lot of reports about, maybe there's pets in the home and they're not being cleaned up after. With older children, we typically wouldn't open that because the risks aren't as high. But if you've got young children crawling around on the floor and there's dog feces on the floor, things like that, that would obviously be a health hazard and a case would be open. So, sibling at risk is when a child's at risk of being abused or neglected because another child was abused or neglected by the same person, basically. So this typically happens if say we've removed children in the past because a parent maybe used illegal substances and weren't, anyway, if children were removed in the past and then mom has another baby, the baby might be safe, but we can still open a case for sibling at risk just to make sure that it's safe for baby to go home with mom. And so that's just one example of what sibling at risk would be. Educational neglect really needs to be reported by the schools. If a child's enrolled in school, not attending a certain amount of days, the school is required to notify the parent. And then if the child continues to miss after that, the school can contact us. Failure to protect is when the parent knows there's abuse or neglect happening and they don't do anything to stop it or report it. Non-supervision, there is no legal age at which you can leave children home alone. And so this is really based on the child's maturity level. We just have to assess whether or not the child's at a level where they could be left home alone. And obviously that has to do with, I mean, how long they were left. We'll try to assess, do they know what to do in case of an emergency? Can they make themselves food if they get hungry? Do they have a phone to call if there's a concern, or someone to call if there's a concern, things like that. So so that's non-supervision. Abandonment, I'm just going to skip that one. That's pretty rare. Dependency is when it's not abuse or neglect, but it's when a child's at risk of being abused or neglected through no fault of the parent. That could be a situation where maybe a parent's hospitalized for a period of time and there's no one to care for their children. We could step in under dependency allegation and to maybe help find a placement for the child. So that was a lot, and I'm sorry, I just kind of went really quickly through that. You're welcome to contact me, like I said, if you have additional questions about those, or we can talk about it at the end. But I'm just going to keep going. So when it now I'm okay, frozen. When it comes to making a report, there's two ways to make a report. The first way is through the hotline, the number's on the screen. If you work with children, hopefully you have this number saved in your phone or somewhere so you can make a report. That's 24/7. I always used to make the joke that, if you're lonely late at night and need someone to talk to, you can call the number. There's always someone there to answer your call. But that's one way to make the report. The other way to make a report is online. There's a form at the DCFS website. That's DCFS at utah.gov. Under Child Protective Services, there's an online form. So if you prefer not to make the call, you'd rather do it online, you can do it that way. Just be aware that if it's a situation that you believe needs an urgent response, it's better to call the hotline because sometimes it takes us a few days to process all of the online reports that come in. If you call us, then we'll know immediately, that we need to send someone out. So just be aware of that. When you make a report, we're going to ask a lot of demographic information. The reason for that is because we document everything in our system. And so the history of the family can be really important to us. And so if we have, the right information, we can tie that information together in our system and see the history that we might have with a family. So names, addresses, dates of birth, phone numbers, all of that stuff is important to us. Two things that we have to have in order to become involved would be a way to locate the child. And then also a detailed concern that would rise to the level of what the state of Utah considers to be abuse or neglect. And that's where sometimes there's a lot of gray area involved. And that's what makes this job really difficult is that it's just not always black and white. We get lots of reports about legitimate concerns, but maybe it's more of like a parenting issue, but it doesn't necessarily rise to the level of what the state would consider to be abuse or neglect. And so as a result, only about half of all referrals get open for investigation. The other half are just documented in our system. But then again, they're helpful to us even if we don't open a case because when another call comes in, we look up that family in our system and that information is there and it can still be used to help us assess the situation. When you make a report, you have the right to be anonymous. However, it's always helpful if you're willing to leave your contact information because then the caseworker can, reach out if they have follow-up questions that they want to ask. Anyway, it's helpful if you're willing to leave your contact information, and it is kept confidential. Even if the family is able to access the records from the case, any information about the referent is redacted from that. But also be aware that sometimes depending on what it is you're reporting, sometimes the family might guess or assume, but we should not be ever sharing that information. When you make a report, you should be notified if a case is being opened or not. If a case is being opened, then we assign it one or more of those allegations that we were just talking about. And we also assign it a priority response time, which means how long the assigned caseworker has to see the child and assess their safety. We really don't use priority ones very often. It's mostly priority twos and priority threes. A priority two would be a situation where we need a more urgent response. The caseworker has up to 24 hours, depending on the situation. I mean, it might be an immediate response. We often get calls from law enforcement, maybe a parent's being arrested and there's no one to care for the child. In a case like that, we're not going to wait 24 hours to go out. We're going to go out immediately. And so a priority two just means that we need to respond within 24 hours, depending on the situation. Some other examples of a priority two could be physical abuse where the child has visible injuries. We want to be able to see those injuries, document those injuries, see if the child needs medical care, those types of things. So that would be a priority two. Also, if there's alleged sex abuse where the alleged perpetrator has access to the child, that would be made a priority two. The rest of the cases are assigned as priority threes, meaning that the caseworker has up to 3 business days to see the child and assess their safety. When a caseworker, when a case is opened, this is a list of the things that the caseworker needs to do. They need to interview the child if they're verbal, away from the alleged perpetrator. We often go to schools to interview children for that reason. Usually children feel safe at school, and usually the perpetrator isn't at the school. So we can go and interview them at the school. And in some cases, if it's like sex abuse or, like a serious physical abuse or other types of things, we will typically interview children at the Children's Justice Center. So hopefully you're familiar with that. If you're not, email me and we can talk more about it. But we have to interview the child if they're verbal. If they're not verbal, we still have to see them in that time frame and check them, make sure they're safe. We have to interview both parents when possible. We have to interview a collateral contact, so a third party who might have information about the concern or the family. In many cases, or most cases, we do a home visit to make sure the home is safe and appropriate for the kids. And so we're not investigators, we're social workers. And really, I mean, we'll talk about this in a minute, but we're supposed to be assessing the safety of the child. But we do make a finding at the end of the case. The finding, the 2 most common findings are supported and unsupported. A supported finding typically means we found evidence the abuse or neglect occurred. Unsupported doesn't mean that it didn't happen, but maybe we just aren't able to prove it. You should be notified if you made the report. You should be notified when the case is being closed. Sometimes it's frustrating, especially for professionals working with children that contact us. We're not able to share information about the case because it's confidential. And sometimes that can be frustrating, but we're just not able to share according to the law. So perpetrators can appeal the findings that we make, but so again, back to we're not law enforcement, we're not investigators, we don't charge people. What we're supposed to be doing, I mean, we have to try and determine if the abuse or neglect occurred so that we can make that finding, but that finding is just a word on a piece of paper. It doesn't help keep children safe. So we should be assessing to determine if the child's safe. And if the child's not safe, what do we need to do to create safety for the child? Do we need ongoing services, and if so, what does that look like? So here's what we can do. Sometimes a CPS worker will go out and they'll assess the situation, and maybe things are good with the family. But maybe we'll just provide them with some resource information and close the case. There's other times where we go out and we do our assessment. We determine that there are some concerns going on in the home, but the family is willing to work with us. So what we can do in situations like that is we can, we'll leave the children in the home. the CPS worker will transfer the case to an ongoing worker who would then work with the family to address any of those concerns, provide them resource information or help them access services that they might need, along with continuing to check on the kids and make sure, everyone's doing well. So that would be a voluntary situation. The next option would be if we determine that there's safety concerns in the home, maybe the children can still remain there. They don't need to be removed, but we need to address these safety issues. And the family doesn't want to work with us, which look, we get that people see us as the bad guys, but really our job is to try and help families. And so, but they might not want to work with us. We can still keep the kids in the home. We can petition the juvenile court to become involved. And then if the judge agrees, the judge can order the family to do certain things. And so the CPS worker, again, would transfer the case to an ongoing worker. Their job would be to help the parents complete those court-ordered services. They would be checking on the kids again to make sure they're safe. Again, they're still in the home. They would be safety planning with the family to try and make sure that the kids are safe in the home, those types of things. And so the last option is removing the removal of the children. And I know that sometimes people see us as the bad guys because they think that that's all we do is remove children. That couldn't be further from the truth. We don't want to remove children unless we absolutely have to. We're going to do what we can to try and keep them in the home safely. The children only get removed if we can't do that. Like if the family's not willing to safety plan with us and they're not willing to work with us and there's significant safety concerns going on in the home, that's when a child would be removed. And in order to remove children, either a judge has to issue a warrant or make an order that the children come into custody. So we're not making that decision on our own. So that only happens, it depends on the year. Obviously, it varies, but I would say usually between 6 and 8% of cases lead to removal. And I think that's important to know so that you know that these cases don't often lead to a removal of children. When children get removed, it obviously can cause a lot of trauma, and we want to avoid that whenever possible. I mean, even when parents are abusive or neglectful, typically children still want to be with their parents, and so that's why I think we do what we can to try and create safety in the home whenever possible. But if we can't, if they do have to be removed from the home by federal law, we have to look at placing them with family. So we would look, is there another parent that could take the child? Is there extended family that can pass a home and a background check that are willing to take the child? If not, then we would look for a family friend. So that could be a neighbor or a coach or a teacher or someone from the family's church, someone that the child knows but maybe isn't related to. So we could look at placing with them. They would need to start working towards getting licensed, and we could help them licensed as a foster parent since they're not related to the child, but we can help get that going for them. And then the last options would be to place the child in a foster home or a residential facility if they might need that type of service. So these statistics probably need to be fixed. I don't think they're exactly accurate. At intake, we receive probably 70,000 phone calls a year. A little over 50,000 of those are reports of abuse or neglect. Sometimes people call us with questions and things. And so I think it's important to bring that up. Like if a family is maybe involved in the system and you need to talk to the caseworker, you might call the intake department and say, hey, I need the caseworker's information. We can't confirm or deny if we're involved with the family, but we can help get you in touch with a caseworker if there is a case open. So just be aware of that you can call intake with other questions. Also be aware, I didn't mention this, but on the DCFS website where we have the online reporting form, there's also a chat button there, a chat feature. It's a newer thing, but if you have a question and you don't want to call through and hold online, I mean, you still might have to hold for a few minutes, but you can chat with an agent. Um, like I said, about half of all of the reports made are open for investigation, and the rest of them are documented in our system. About 40% of all of the allegations get supported. But we have thousands we work with thousands of children on an ongoing basis, here at DCFS. So after the Child Protective Services case, we might assign it to an ongoing worker, like I talked about. We have thousands of those happening. Over 40% of kids that get removed are in our state are placed with kinship, with family, which is, again, really important to help lessen the trauma involved. And then when children do get removed, almost always the goal is reunification with the parents. And so if the parents can complete the court-ordered services and create a safe home, the children will go back to them. And if not, if they're with family member, extended family, oftentimes the judge will give the extended family member custody and guardianship of the child. And if the children are with in a foster home and they don't get to go back home, there's not a reunification that happens, then we look at them being adopted so they can have a permanent family. So I'm almost finished here. But we often use this picture here to just kind of talk a little bit about what it's like for children to be removed. This picture was drawn by, I think, maybe a 12-year-old girl after she had been removed from her mother and placed with her grandmother. And she showed it to her caseworker, who asked her about it. And basically she said that on the left side, that was what life was like with her mom. It was kind of scary. Her mom had substance abuse issues, and there were a lot of people coming in and out of the home that were scary, and she just wasn't safe. She didn't feel safe. And so she's got flames and fangs on the left side there to indicate that, she didn't feel safe at mom's house. On the right side, she was placed with her grandmother when she got removed from her mom, and the right side represents what life was like with her grandmother. Her grandmother was really kind to her, took care of her. She felt safe there. So she's got a smiley face and hearts and things. But the caseworker asked her why the smiley face was upside down, and she said that even though her grandma was really good to her and she felt safe there, it still wasn't her mom. Her grandmother still wasn't her mom, and she still, missed her mom. And so I think that just kind of represents the difficulties in, making those decisions and why it's, hard to remove kids from their homes. But that's really, I think, I went through that all really fast, and it's a lot of information. And so please, let's go ahead and try to answer any questions that you guys might have about any of that.
Awesome. Hey, I just wanted to thank you again for giving a wonderful presentation, Marnie. I thought that was so insightful, and I really appreciated that example at the end, kind of just showing, a real world example. So I really enjoyed that. We did have a question come in the chat from Cami, and she was asking that she had a caregiver recently ask about a child that is already in state care and is wanting to become a fictive kinship placement for the child. Is that a possibility? And how would she do that if she doesn't know the case number? And I don't know if Cami wanted to come off mute and give a little more context. You don't have to, but if you did want to, you can.
Yeah,
Yeah, we just met her at a at an outreach event, and she is neighbors with the family, knows that the child is in state custody, but she wasn't the one who called in, and so um, she's interested in becoming a placement, but isn't sure how to go about doing that.
okay.
I'm pretty sure she'd have to be licensed. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think it would depend on where the children are placed right now, but the best thing for her to do would be to call intake and let us know that, because again, we won't be able to confirm or deny anything with her, but we can get her contact information and we can share that with the caseworker. So if the kids aren't with family, then the caseworker can potentially consider this person as a placement. They would need to become licensed, if they're not related. They would need to become licensed eventually, but we can still place with the children with somebody who's not related while they work on becoming licensed. Everyone in the home, anyone who lives in the home would have to pass a background check, and we would go and check the home to make sure it's safe. But we could consider them as a placement, depending on, again, where the kids are at right now.
That's very helpful. Thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Yeah, we'll open up the floor to questions. If anyone wanted to just raise their hand or you can drop it in the chat, that'd be welcome. I actually had a question for you. So I think a lot of the time I mean, yeah, a lot of the times you even said it that DCFS might be painted as maybe the bad guy, but how would you say you go about decreasing that fear around reporting, around working with the Department of Child and Family Services here in Utah? And how would you decrease that fear among maybe like early childhood professionals or case managers?
Yeah, I think having some of these discussions like we're having today, where we talk about the fact that, like I said, I think sometimes people are afraid to report because they think that it's always going to lead to a removal, and like I said, I think getting out the information that that's not the case, that that's not what we want. Like we don't want to be raising other people's children, and we don't have enough foster homes as it is, and so just knowing that our ultimate goal is to try to keep children in the home safely whenever possible. And again, we're social workers, and so that's what we're trying to do. And I think just getting that message out is what's important. Sometimes when I'm talking about things like medical neglect, I'm talking about medical neglect, and it's about not getting your child proper medical care. But like sometimes parents, like we know that sometimes parents don't get proper medical care or dental care or psychological care for their children because maybe they don't have insurance and they can't afford it and they don't know where to go. I mean, but that's why, that's why you do call us so that we can help the family access those services that they need. It doesn't mean that we're going to go take the kids, right? So I think just getting that message out and having those conversations and becoming more aware of, what we're doing and what we're trying to do here is the most helpful thing we can do.
And then maybe a little follow-up. If you could say that if there is room for improvement between cross-system collaborations between, let's say, like in a home visiting program in DCFS, what do you think would be some of the biggest changes that you'd want to see in the systems that you work within?
Um, that's hard one for me to answer because I'm not really involved in that. I mean, I know, I think that program is really helpful to the families that we're all working with. But I don't know some of the barriers that are happening just because I don't typically in my position like hear a lot about that. And maybe some of the audience would actually have better information about that and ways that we could improve. I think. I would say like good communication, obviously. I mean, I think if we have other agencies going into the home that's seeing the children and seeing the families, I mean, if there's concerns, making sure that those get reported so that we can work together to address them, those types of things. But like I said, I don't really have a lot of information specifically about that.
I think that was a great answer, though, just that open communication between partners and just opening up those doorways to kind of and I think once you do that, it's again reducing that stigma and fear around even talking with DCFS. So I also really appreciated just that reminder where you told us that, DCFS, they're not really investigators or law enforcement. It's kind of almost like case management or a social worker. So
Right.
your job is you're out there trying to help these families. So I really appreciate you in the work that you're doing and going out and trying to reduce that stigma as well.
Yeah, thanks. I think if you're working with a family that we're also involved with, developing a good relationship with the caseworker so you have that better communication, but also, we're a really big system and it's not an easy job. And we have a lot of, we can have a lot of turnover and newer caseworkers and things. And so, providing feedback, I mean, you can always reach out to the intake program if maybe you have a concern about a case or a caseworker. I mean, there are options. We have constituent services within DCFS if you have a concern that a case isn't going well, that can try to help address that. And if that doesn't work, there's also the Child Protection Ombudsman who works under the department. And so just let us know if there's an issue because we want to try and address that. And I know at the intake level, I mean, I'm over the intake program. And so if you make a report and you didn't have good, I mean, it wasn't a good experience or you're concerned about the decision that was made, reach out to me because we want to get it right. If we mess up, if we make a mistake, we want to get it right. And we can go back and look at the information and fix it if needed. So just be aware of that as well.
Hey, awesome. Thank you so much again, Marnie. I really appreciated the presentation that you had for us today. I'll give it a few more seconds just in case anyone else wanted to raise their hand or drop a question in the chat. See, you did such a good job that I think you answered all their questions. I'm positive.
Sure. Well,
I'm
thank you for
positive.
yeah, thanks for the opportunity. And again, I don't know if Leo, are you able to share my email with everyone so they
Yeah.
can reach out to me if they have
Or
any other questions?
let me find it really.
Or
It
I
was
can put
it.
it in the chat.
Could I have you put it in the chat super quick? I'm sorry. I
Let's
have so many
see.
emails sometimes they just start piling up and
I understand. Okay, there's my email. You're welcome to email me anytime. And I appreciate your time today and hope you all have a good rest of your day.
And then again, if you guys want to, you can join us back in September on September 9th. We're going to have Casey Tack from the University of Utah talk to us about access to rural perinatal substance use disorder and treatment. And also, if you'd like an invite to the Canvas page, you may email projectscope@usu.edu to access past recordings, this recording, additional resources, and just a lot more fun things when you get an invite to that Canvas page. So thank you guys again. And also remember to take that survey that I've been dropping in throughout the chat so you can get your certificate of attendance for this session today. So thank you again, Marnie, and thank you guys so much for being here.
Thanks.
Oh,
Bye-bye.
and yeah, we just I forgot to remind everyone we're not going to have a case presentation just because I don't have my core team. So that's why I ended so early. But thank you guys so much.